So every now and then, a series really manages to catch me off guard with how good it is. Usually I look around Reddit or my anime list to see if there's any shows that, I should watch. So typically out of these recommendations, there's only a few shows that manage to catch my eye, and even out of these few shows, it's even a smaller selection that I actually finish watching. And that's a shorthand explanation for why almost all my reviews are typically positive. I only finish watching the shows that I like. So when I came across Rakudai Kishi no Cavalry, also known as Chivalry of the Failed Knight, I was hesitant to even start the series. By all accounts, pretty much every first impression that the show gave was just generic. And then there's been so many generic light novel adaptations lately that it all seems to blend together after a while, especially since the show takes place in the frequently used setting of a high school. So sprinkle in some magical abilities and a harem for the main character, and you could probably see why I thought it would be super generic. Rakudai manages to be one of those rare shows that starts off generic, but manages to set itself apart, and it's worth giving the show a chance. So I'm Bananaowns, and this is an Otaku Youth anime review. The world of Rakudai possesses blazers, humans with powers that can manifest part of their soul into a weapon. So a large variety of academies train blazers in their arts in order for them to become mage knights, and mage knights can be described as almost a police force used to really track down rogue blazers, and they're also for ambassador-like purposes as well. And that's pretty much the main basic setup of the world. It's still the normal modern world, it's just that there's magical knights running around. So Rakudai follows the adventures of Iki Kurogane as he attempts to become a mage knight. However, due to familial interference, Iki is the lowest ranked student at his school, and the only way for him to graduate is to win the 7-Star Sword Art Festival, a tournament between the various academies of Japan. Early on, Iki meets Stella Vermilion, a foreign princess who decided to study abroad in Japan. Stella is a high-ranking blazer who's regarded by many as a natural genius. And through some shenanigans, the two become roommates and ultimately partners for the rest of the story. So at first, Rakudai appears to be very generic. I know that the initial synopsis doesn't really sell the show in terms of it being special. For the first 3 or so episodes, this generic impression is, correct. Iki faces an uphill battle to prove himself as a variety of girls take an interest in him. It's nothing new. It really starts off as a typical harem anime. However, after episode 4, the show manages to evolve immensely. There is a confession of love, and then the harem aspect takes a backseat and almost completely disappears. Rakudai is rare in that it creates a romance that many harems fail to address at all. It also helps that this romance is very satisfying as the two characters begin to learn more about each other and their relationship as well. So after this confession, the show really does put a large emphasis on the preparation for the Sword Art Festival, mixed in with a lot of relationship dynamics. Like I said, it takes a bit of time for Rakudai to really reach this change, but once it does, the show is pretty good. Like, it's amazing how well they were able to turn it around. And this development is really what sets Rakudai apart. A focus on the romantic aspect is satisfying because, most anime tend to ignore the romance part, unless it's very explicit romance, especially in harem animes too. Most of the time it's never developed at all, and I think I already mentioned that. So this leads to a plot that's focused, largely on the explorations of the characters. So the bulk of Rakudai focuses on character motivation and development. Two leads, Iki and Stella, are two of the most interesting characters of the show, which is good considering, they're the two main leads. Much like the overall plot of the show, the two characters experience a change after the confession in episode 4. Iki Kurogane is a member of the famous Kurogane family, known for their powerful blazers. However, unlike the rest of his family, Iki doesn't possess the same level of natural talent, and was ultimately abandoned by his family for that reason. As a result, he manages to acquire all of his skills through hard work and dedication. And that's one of the more interesting facets of the character. He is one of the most hardworking characters that I have seen in an anime. And this is very refreshing because he's not a natural genius. He works so hard for everything. He isn't the natural powerhouse like Kirito from Sword Art Online. And this sets him apart from the typical overpowered anime protagonist. Every facet of his skills is the result of training. from his ability to read enemy techniques and to his sword technique as well. Everything is the result of his own actions. And then to complicate matters even further, once he starts to receive some notoriety from becoming so strong, his family attempts to get him expelled from the school on multiple occasions. So Ikki's a character that faces an enormous amount of adversity, but he maintains his hardworking persona despite these problems. So Stella, the female protagonist, is, well, just as interesting. Initially she appears to be a typical tsundere, but that quickly changes. She possesses a strong desire to be acknowledged for her hard work, a fact made difficult due to the perception of her being a natural genius. This is even further troubled considering her position as royalty. Her drive to be acknowledged led her to study abroad so that she would not be surrounded by a symphony of yes men. So when Ikki acknowledges her talent in the first episode, she pretty much immediately falls in love with him. And despite the initial chorus of bakas, Stella's not the typical female protagonist. I already mentioned her insecurities and desire to be acknowledged, but her deferring personality really shines in the romance aspect. With some initial nervousness, Stella actually makes a significant amount of moves on Ikki, and in a harem anime, that's not typical at all. She actually attempts to ask him out fairly early on into the series. And by the end of episode 4, the two are, well, they're a couple. By episode 4 in a harem anime that the two characters are already a couple, that's freaking crazy. So I really enjoy her characterization in the romance. It's really overcomes the typical innocent anime female trope very nicely. She's not perverted, but she carries the normal desire to be intimate with Ikki, whether it's kissing or something a little bit more. And this is really refreshing because she acts like a normal person would in a relationship. You want to kiss the person that you're dating. You want to show public displays of love. At least some people like that. But it's just like you want to do things with that person besides sharing your character motivation. There's a physical aspect as well. And since the show is largely focused on this relationship, it is very important that it's handled well. And it's fortunate that it is. It's a great anime relationship, and it's probably the best one in any harem show. You know, it happens quickly, but the characters possess an attraction for each other that goes beyond the usual blush and the baka. And by the end of the show, there's another payoff with this romance that really shows the strength of these characters. Overall, the animation quality for Rakudai is good. The animation during many of the dialogue scenes is fairly typical for a series of this magnitude, but it does not stand out as bad in any way. So Rakudai really shines in its presentation of the fight scenes. Seriously, the fight scenes in this show are absolutely breathtaking. Ikki's fights are especially visually impressive. Ikki's combat ability of Itoshura is perfectly represented as well as his visual abilities. Seriously, the way they animate Ikki's thought process or even just his overall tactical ability is frankly amazing. And of course, since Ikki lacks the more crazy magical abilities, every fight scene that he is in is choreographed very well. In terms of other characters, the fight scenes are animated moderately well. There's a standout sequence between Ikki's sister and the class president in one of the later episodes. That's all I'm going to say about that because it's a really good scene. However, not all of the other characters' fights are, well, as interesting as Ikki's. In particular, Stella's fights are rather uninteresting. And she has one of the cooler weapons. I mean, it's a freaking like fire broadsword. But besides her first fight, she really doesn't get to shine in terms of any of the action. And that's my one criticism of Rakudai's animation. They spend so much time on Ikki's scenes to make them look very well done that they ultimately skip over Stella's fight scenes. Most of her fight scenes just recount the ending of the fight, which is usually her just standing there waving her sword around, and that's fairly uninteresting. However, I don't think you can go wrong with watching this anime, for the fight scenes, especially since Ikki's are so well done, and considering that his fight scenes compose a large amount of the overall fight scenes of the series, you can't go wrong. So in terms of sound design, I typically don't have a lot to say. Hopefully as I continue doing reviews, I get a more nuanced understanding of sound design, but for the time being, I'll just mention if anything manages to stand out, or if anything doesn't really stand out. So Rakudai's sound design works as it should. The music fits the mood of every scene appropriately, while the sound effects do so as well. I especially like the slowdown sound effect as Ikki analyzes and decides which physical ability to alter during a fight. Those are pretty impressive. And some of the sound effects involving electricity are especially great. But overall, it's just the sound. It doesn't really manage to stand out in any way. And I keep saying over and over again that I suppose that's a good problem to have, because if there was something wrong with it, then that would stand out. So not really noticing the sound design isn't a negative, because, well, it just fits. So Rakudai managed to surpass every single one of my expectations. Now admittedly, they were a little low considering of how generic I thought the show was at first, but the show was great. So while it starts off rather generic, it manages to set itself apart very quickly. And this is mostly due to the characters of Ikki and Stella, and their evolving relationship. It really manages to overcome the more traditional traps of the harem genre to a point where it manages to really stop being a harem show. The animation quality is great as well, especially during the many fight scenes, and the sound merely fits the show, but that's fine. Rakudai Kishi no Cavalry earns my watch rating. It's really an entertaining show that I'm sure a lot of people will like, but you just gotta give it a chance. And I know a lot of people have a 3-episode watch rule, but for this show, I'm going to recommend a 5-episode watch rule. So if you don't like it after 5 episodes, then feel free to drop it, but if you don't give it at least that much, then you're going to really miss out. Anyways, I'm Bananaowns, and this has been an Otaku Youth Anime Review, and see you guys next week. And we're going to cover Sound Euphonium next week. So thanks for watching, guys.